Hey, everybody! I'm just kidding. Hi, I'm the pedantic skeptic, and I'm here to criticize people's arguments and grammar so that you have the best information to make informed decisions. So, we're going to continue on with Genesis Apologetics. Where do the races come from? Where they attempt to show that evolution can't possibly be true because Darwin came up with something that promotes racism. Quick, give me a sec. Hey, dogs, enough. Labradoodle and Golden Doodle, you two need to be quiet. Anything else you'd like to say?
This later led to the forced assimilation of over 100,000 plus Aboriginal children who were abducted from their families between 19...
Actually, the idea that everybody needed to be Christian in order to be saved, and that the way that these people were living their lives and the things they believed in were not actually valid ideas or supposed to be practiced, were the reason that they were forcibly assimilated into white culture. That's on you guys. Riley.
1910 and 1970. Next, let's look at the biblical view on race. While the Bible's take on race has remained constant since it was written, many have run astray with false
Did he just put up humanism? I mean, I get the point, small dog. Hey, small friend, stop licking me. Did he just say he made them male and female because that has nothing to do with race?
Interpretations, and some of these were driven by impure motives. But a plain reading through Scripture...
Can you elaborate on the impure motives, please?
...reveals there were two humans created at the beginning in the image of God and not in the image of apes. Indeed, Adam was not one of the animals. Rather, God had him name the animals and then take dominion over them. Adam and Eve's DNA was perfect. Their genome included all the necessary programming for the variability that we see today in various people groups.
I'm pretty sure that's not written in the Bible.
Some of the differences we observe with people today are also due to mutations that began compounding after the fall. The genealogies in Genesis provide a clear map to Adam about 6,000 years ago. Interestingly, secular research on mitochondrial DNA mutation rates actually confirms this biblical timeline.
Oh boy, are we going to go into mitochondrial Eve again? So, the whole issue with this mitochondrial DNA and mitochondrial Eve is that mitochondrial Eve is this generic name given to the common maternal ancestor of all currently living humans. It doesn't mean that the human species that we know of today is only 6,500 years old. What it means is that about 6,500 years ago, there were a bunch of bloodlines of humans, and mitochondrial DNA is passed from the mother to the offspring. And the reason for that is because the egg contains mitochondria, and mitochondria contain their own DNA. And the sperm has mitochondria, but those mitochondria don't get incorporated into the resulting fertilized embryo. What happens is the sperm mitochondria die during fertilization, and so all of your mitochondria that you have come from your mother. And this doesn't mean that there was only one human female 6,500 years ago that produced the different humans now. What it means is that the humans that we have today were from a subset of humans who had a mother, and there were other subsets of humans who had other mothers, but those other subsets eventually died off. It doesn't mean that there was only one human female back then. What it means is, you could have multiple males from different mothers mating with the females who descended from the same mother. And so you have a huge subpopulation of humans, but because they're only um, getting the mitochondria from their mother, you can very easily have unrelated individuals with the same mitochondrial DNA.
Demonstrating that we all come from a single woman who lived only about 6,000 years ago. This mutation rate is even used by the FBI in forensic investigations. Then, just 10 generations after Adam and Eve, the entire human genome was bottlenecked to just 8 people who survived the year-long flood. This genetic bottleneck is at least partially responsible for the shortened lifespans of those who lived after the flood.
Since when does genetics have anything, well, a lot to do with your life expectancy?
The post-flood population.
Well, what I should say is this. There are things that will contribute to your longevity, including your genetics, but genetic bottleneck by definition reduces the available genetic material to such a degree that genetics or your life expectancy would have to be mediated by 1 or 2 genes at the most in order for a bottleneck to affect longevity to an extent where in the Bible you have people who live 900 years and today we have people who are lucky to make it to 80. Longevity is mediated by a number of factors, genetic, epigenetic, and environmental. And, even if it's a purely genetic relationship, you haven't demonstrated that there's a single or a couple of genes that are responsible for longevity. Actually, why don't we go genetic basis? Okay, longevity has a genetic basis with a heritability estimate of 20 to 35%. Okay, so there are genes that do affect your longevity. However, like I said, a genetic bottleneck, in order for it to have that much of an effect on a trait, that trait has to be not only incredibly heritable, but mediated by a very select number of genes. So let's see. Here's a open access peer-reviewed paper. Yeah, I love open access peer-reviewed papers, motherfuckers. All right, let's see. Riley's just looking at me like, what the fuck? Okay, let me scroll. Why? Life expectancy and the rate of survival of old age have risen during the past century. Well, no shit. Okay. Longevity is a complex polygenetic trait influenced by the interaction of multiple genetic variants. If you had a genetic bottleneck, you wouldn't have just one, you would need 1 or 2 genes to be responsible, not, the plethora described here. I'm not going to get into all of the different things. So basically longevity is inversely related to aging, and the better you age, the longer you live. And so you have to age to a lesser degree in order to live to a greater degree. So the longer you live, the slower you age. It's inversely related. And aging is mediated by a number of things, such as telomeres, which are the ends of your DNA that get cut every time you have a cell division event occur. So naturally, the older you are, the more DNA has been removed through successive cellular divisions. And so you have less genetic material available. And that causes a number of problems. One, you cut off pieces of genes, and two, you have less buffer DNA. Most of your DNA is non-coding, and that is advantageous because you have, if a mutation occurs, there's a lower chance it's going to occur in something important in your DNA, as well as making it harder for parasites like viruses to enter your DNA code because there's not a lot of coding DNA in relation to the non-coding DNA. It's kind of why like a goal in soccer is a limited size, because if the goal was wider than a person could travel and just in the amount of time it takes for them to get the ball, you would have an easy ability to make a goal. With DNA, you have a lot of extra material, which is costly to reproduce, but it means that if something really goes wrong and shit hits the fan with a genetic division or something, or a genetic replication, you're less likely to have it actually affect an important thing. So we're not going to get into all the factors that cause aging, but it's not completely genetically controlled. And here you can see, in this section, you have insulin-mediated longevity factors, lipid metabolism, inflammation, oxidative stress, activity levels, epigenetics. I mean, there's just so much that is related to your longevity. Back to our video. This is exhausting me, guys.
Increased quickly and was later dispersed as over 70 language groups spread around the globe after God confused their languages at Babel.
I'm not even going to whip out the cranberries for this one.
Genesis 10:32 records, "These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood." Recent scientific studies even confirmed there was explosive human population growth and DNA variability that occurred about the same time period.
This doesn't mean that it has anything to do with a flood and dispersion from the Tower of Babel.
The New Testament also confirms God's plan to spread the nations over the earth, and He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Are there differences?
This still doesn't account for different races of people. I mean, even if you mention there's a wide range of genetic diversity occurring, they haven't tied race in humans to genetic diversity. And I know what you're thinking, well, yes, but by definition, when we're talking about populations, races are different genetic subgroups, sure, but we don't have that in humans.
Between people groups today? Of course. The variety we see in people today, which exists both within and between people groups, is because of the pre-engineered adaptability that God established within the language of our DNA. Some of the differences we see are also due to mutations, or DNA copying mistakes.
Sure. You have the basics of this down. It's a little bit more complicated than DNA copying mistakes. Technically, you can have issues that occur after the copying rather than during the copying, but we'll just give you that, sure.
But the traits we typically use to categorize race groups are superficial, such as...
Yes, this is correct. the appearance of somebody's skin and the way that their facial features are and things like that are not the reason we have so much variability there is because these are not important enough to our survival and reproduction that they get, you know, something like a metabolic trait. Like if you were unable to synthesize vitamin A, humans are unable to synthesize a number of vitamins, so they have to get it from their diet. But if you were unable to synthesize vitamin A, for example, now humans can synthesize vitamin A. Um, you can also take it in from your diet, but you have to be careful. If you're just taking straight vitamin A, you can get toxicity from it because you can't flush it out, and I think you can fry your kidneys, or you can do something really fucked up to your body if you're taking too much vitamin A. That's generally why they recommend you taking beta carotene because you require the precursory molecules, but you can take stuff that you eat and turn it into vitamin A. And generally, carotenoids, specifically beta carotene and a few other things. And I'm not a biochemist, so I don't know all of the details here. Um, but you take in beta carotene or some other carotenoid, and your body turns into vitamin A because you require vitamin A for various functions. Now, once you have the requisite amount of vitamin A in your body, the rest of that beta carotene gets flushed out. Um, sometimes if you take in too many pigment molecules and then you flush the rest out, your pee is a different color because that's your body, your kidneys are filtering in all that extra carotenoid or whatever it is. Um, but if there is a genetic mutation that stops you from being able to do that, then the people who have that trait are not going to survive and reproduce unless that group of people is fed supplemental vitamin A. And by the way, there are a number of metabolic traits that humans can inherit, like the inability to break down phenylalanine. I forget the exact name of the condition, but if you can't break down phenylalanine, you have a condition and it's genetic, and they test for it when you're born. And if you can't break down phenylalanine, it's going to build up and cause a lot of brain problems because it builds up and accumulates in the brain and it blocks normal functioning. And the way to treat that is just not to consume phenylalanine. And so this is your body can't process phenylalanine. This is a genetic mutation. And we test for it at birth so we know if this person has this particular trait, we can stop them from eating phenylalanine so they don't develop the condition associated with this gene. These are the types of genetic mutations that are far more important to somebody's survival than genetic mutations that cause variability in your skin color or other things.
Has differences in skin, hair, and eye color. These traits account for less than 0.012% of human genetic differences.
Should I bother fact checking this? I mean, it's not that important to the point that either of us are trying to make here. But you have to remember, I do want to know, human genetic differences when you're talking about them. Are they referring to all genetic differences, or are they only referring to differences in the coding portion of DNA? Because two different people are going to have a certain degree of difference between them, of course. But you can have identical twins who express all the same traits because all of their coding DNA is identical, but their non-coding DNA is different. And even identical twins have genetic differences between them. They're not 100% copies. As I've said before, you get mutations every time you have a DNA replication occur. So technically, they're not 100% genetically identical. Genetic replication is just not that infallible of a process.
Or one gene out of 12,000.
All right, now I got to fact check that. One gene out of 12,000. Wait, no, do I really? I mean, that's a proper rate. I guess I was thinking they're asserting that there are only 12,000 genes in the human genome, which is not true. I'm not even going to worry about that.
Let's take a look at skin color. What would cause some people to have very dark skin while other skin is lighter?
Because the ancestors of the people with darker skin need to shield themselves from extra UV radiation that's found in the regions where their ancestors hail from. Otherwise, the UV radiation would harm them in ways that would affect their fitness and reproductive ability. Meanwhile, the people living further north, away from some of the extra radiation that hits the earth from the sun, would need to produce enough vitamin D to be able to survive because vitamin D is an important vitamin. And one of the ways you get vitamin D is having UV light hit your skin and activate various molecules that synthesize vitamin D. It's a very complicated biochemical process. We also get vitamin D from our diet, but there's a lot to it. But if you produce more vitamin D, you're more fit. You have the ability to live longer and produce more offspring. And so the individuals who protect themselves from extra UV radiation will pass on those traits to their offspring, because the ones that are not protecting themselves are dying off at a higher rate from cancer and other mutations that occur because of the lack of shielding. And then when you have people further north, the people who have lighter skin and are able to synthesize more of their own vitamin D are less reliant on dietary sources of vitamin D, and they are more fit and they produce more offspring. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that in northern regions, the dark skinned people all die because they are not producing enough vitamin D. It could be the dark skinned people have, one fewer child per generation or something like that. And so they make up a progressively smaller portion of the population until they're completely obscure. That's really what evolution is. You have a change in that frequency of alleles and other traits over time. And remember, skin color is mediated by a number of different genetic markers. It's not just one gene for black and a different gene for whites. Genetics are far, far more complicated than that.
Skin color depends on the level and type of pigment called melanin that special cells in the skin called
Did you just say the type of melanin?
melanocytes produce. Melanin protects the skin by absorbing and scattering the ultraviolet radiation that otherwise would have been absorbed by the DNA, causing
So far, so good. I just went over this.
mutations. People with darker skin fare better in places with intense sunlight for most of the year, like around the equator. Having darker skin helps in these places by protecting against skin cancer, folate deficiency, a cause of spina bifida, tropical ulcers, and other skin diseases. Light-skinned people from the frozen north who visit lower latitudes,
They don't just have to be from the frozen north.
sunny locations have less melanin to block the sun's UVB rays. This is the main reason that whites in the US have 25 times the rate of melanoma skin cancer compared to blacks.
The reason why is because they're absorbing more UV light. And, like, these are rich ass white people who go and visit tropical regions and they don't wear sunscreen and shit like that. It's not that white people are any smarter when it comes to their health. Come on.
People with lighter skin thrive better up north where there is less sunlight because their lighter pigment allows greater absorption of vitamin D from the sun.
You don't absorb vitamin D from the sun, you dumb shit. You absorb the UV radiation, which allows your skin to synthesize the vitamin D. What the fuck?
Vitamin D is needed for healthy bones, protection against rickets,
Which is a part of having healthy bones. You don't need to subdivide that. But what vitamin D does basically is it allows your body to absorb calcium. And vitamin D is not the only chemical that's involved with the absorption of calcium. Zinc and phosphorus are also important in the absorption of calcium. One of the things that can happen with many vertebrates, I think humans, I know geckos have this problem if you're not careful. If geckos get too much phosphorus in their diets, they can actually lose bone calcium because the phosphorus pulls the calcium back out of the bones. Whereas in humans, I think zinc does about the same thing. So it's not just vitamin D.
and certain cancers. This skin shade climate interaction drove people groups to live in areas where they would thrive. Isn't it
It doesn't drive people groups. It is a result of where you're living. It's not that the hole is the perfect shape for the puddle. The puddle is the perfect shape for the hole.
amazing how God's command for us to be fruitful and multiply and later spread
Okay, be fruitful and multiply and spread around the planet doesn't say anything about how you're being fruitful, multiplying, and spreading around the planet.
around the earth was made possible by the pre-engineered adaptability that he designed into our genetic code? When the Lord spoke to Samuel to choose the next leader for Israel, he said, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, for the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart."
Okay.
To wrap this up, let's hear some wise words from Pastor Ephraim Smith.
Human beings, You and I were created in the very image of God. The very image of God. Let that really sink into your heart.
So you're telling me God looks like this?
Today, we were not created like the animals. Animals are created after their kinds. So let's just think of animals on the ground. A giraffe and a hippopotamus. I was just recently at the Sacramento Zoo, and so I saw giraffes. And
You do realize that the features and behaviors of captive giraffes don't represent what a typical giraffe is, right?
And I saw that, again, I was reminded that animals are created after their own kind. You're never going to see a giraffe and a hippopotamus start dating to.
Have you seen the movie Madagascar?
Develop a covenant relationship and have a hippo-raff. Like, that's never going to happen.
I mean, if we really want to get technical here, even if you were to expose giraffe sperm to hippo egg or vice versa, there are a number of chemical blockers that will prevent that fertilization event from even occurring. This is a pre-zygotic hybridization barrier. Now, it just so happens that there are other things that will prevent that occurrence from occurring. You know, you wouldn't have giraffes and hippos mating with one another in a natural setting.
There's no hippo-raffs because God created animals to be in their own kind, but he didn't create human beings like that. We weren't meant to be in the black kind, the white kind, the red kind, the yellow kind, the brown kind. God created one humanity, one blood in the image of God, higher than the angels.
Well, I agree that races and humans aren't distinct from one another. Because from a biological perspective, there aren't actually races the way that like a biologically minded perspective would define race.
Angels. But we live in a world that has a social man-made construct that says based on the color of your skin, your physical features, where you were born, your accent, whether your
I mean, it's more about where your parents were born, but go on.
Parents had money or not, whether you were small town.
Okay, now this is getting away from race as a social construct.
Town, suburban, or inner city, we decide who's smart, who's dumb, who's fast, who's slow, who.
There's a little more to it than that. I'm not going to elaborate right now just because we're running low on time, but that would be something good for a different video.
Can clap on beat, who shouldn't bother to clap, who should be feared and who should be revered. All of this based on those things. That's not the image of God. Yes, issues of race and class, they're real. They're real. But the church, believers, beloved children of God, we are to rise up and model what it means to be a Christ-centered, multi-ethnic, transformative.
By the way, being non-prejudicial and having ideas that people are not any better or worse because of their race or their socioeconomic status, this is not unique or exclusive to Christians. There are enough people who are non-Christian who have perfectly progressive ideas about race and class and other things where you don't need to be a Christian to believe that everybody's equal.
movement. You and I are not limited to the physical. We should be driven by the spiritual.
No, you haven't even demonstrated, you haven't even defined the spiritual or demonstrated the spiritual is even a thing.
Are you a Christian student looking for answers
No.
about what the Bible teaches about creation, the fossil record, dinosaurs? Download the Genesis Apologetics app from the
No, thank you.
iTunes or Google Play stores for.
All right, I think we're done here with this video. All right. Come on, stop screen share. Well, there is my review in response to Genesis Apologetics and where does race come from. I hope that you guys have enjoyed, and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for things I've missed or things I should tackle later, or where I can go. Any suggestions, feedback would be much appreciated. I'm always looking to continue to grow and learn things and know better. So I've been pedantic, aromantic, and adjacent to the Atlantic. Thank you for watching.